If you were looking for functional and fun layouts to include in your new journal setup, but wanted something a bit different than the typical recommendations of a future log or a simple goals list, then you are in the right place. In this video, I have 26 new and novel ideas for you, and the first one is actually at the very back of the journal. Here in the gusseted pocket, we have a little notebook of collections, or a collections pocket notebook. Rather than setting up your collections at the start of your journal, you can make those year-long collections in a separate pocket notebook and store that in the back. Then, if your notebook runs out during the year, you don't have to reset up those collections and transfer all the data. You just pull this one out and put it into the back pocket of your new notebook. The actual specifics of the collections in here are up to you, but you could have things like a future log, a year in pixels, maybe 26 goals that you want to do in 2026, or 26 26s in 2026. The ones we're looking at here aren't actually part of the 26 ideas we have in this video, but just some examples of things that you might want to keep track of in a little notebook like this, just so that then you don't have to set them up again later in the year. I typically find that my regular everyday journals last me anywhere from 3 to 6 months, so having to set some of these up again later in the year isn't really fun, especially if it requires drawing in a whole heap of line work or writing in a lot of little numbers. If you didn't want to store this one in the back of your notebook, you could also just turn it into a removable tracker that's still at the front of your journal. But flipping back to have a look at our next idea, this one here is a quarterly year at a glance. While it can certainly be helpful to have a regular year at a glance where everything is broken down in terms of the months, what I personally find more helpful is having it done by quarters, especially because I do my goal planning and goal setting on a quarterly basis. This is because for most people, a 90-day period, or essentially 1 quarter, is a really good amount of time to focus on one thing. That could be an individual goal that you hope to complete by the end of the quarter, or it could be a smaller part of a long-term goal or project. I find that having the reference of this at the front of my journal is really helpful for making sure I'm mindful of my progress throughout each quarter and throughout the year as a whole. But another style of year at a glance that I also really love is a cyclic year at a glance. This one looks kind of similar to breaking down the year into months, but instead of using months that have 30 or 31 or sometimes 28 days, each cycle has 28 days, or is a 4-week block of time. In this structure, we can also see the quarters of the year because each full row is a quarter. So the first 3 cycles of the year, and then an extra week that I like to call reset week. This system of breaking down the time in the year has been so super helpful for me in terms of my time management, my goal and project organization. And while we do have a separate video on the channel that talks more about cyclic planning, what is even more exciting is that you do not have to write all of these tiny little numbers yourself if you want to set up a year at a glance calendar. Whether you want to do cyclic, quarterly, or the more traditional monthly, we do have free printables of those over in our resource library. That one's linked in the description box below, so make sure to nab those free printables and save yourself a hand cramp and a half having to write out all these little numbers. While the ones I have here are Monday start, we also have Sunday start. We have ones that do or don't have the week numbers, and a couple different font options, so in theory, a calendar for everybody. Flipping over though, another really helpful idea can be having somewhere in your journal dedicated to infrequent tasks and scheduling those. Here I've set this up using the Alastair method, so we have a column for each of the months of the year, and then a larger column here for what the tasks are. Then when you decide to schedule those tasks, you write down the day number underneath the relevant monthly header. So for instance, this first one, a dentist appointment, that's happening on the 23rd of January. So 23 written under that first J. You can also use this to schedule infrequent tasks that happen repeatedly through the year. So you can see here, this one has the 1st of January, the 1st of April, the 1st of July, and the 1st of October for analytics review. If you like the idea of an infrequent task schedule, but don't necessarily like this structure, another way you can do it is using a year at a glance. To use that one, you would just designate your different tasks, different colors, and then color code the calendar to show when those things were happening, or when you wanted to get them done. While I've set this one up with the intention of it being a schedule, so pre-deciding when you're going to be doing things, you could also use a similar style for a log, so recording when something happens rather than when you hope to or planned to have it happen. The next idea we have though are Vellum trackers, and these are really good for when you're keeping track of multiple things and want to see how they relate to each other. On the page, you draw the structure of your tracker, so I've done this as a half-yearly one, so Monday through Sunday along the top, and then the week numbers down the side. so 1 to 13 and then 14 to 26. And then the space over here I've designated for a key. Now of course all of the layouts we have in this video are just ideas, so you can expand it to make it a full year tracker if you wanted to, or put it in your monthly setup as a monthly tracker. But when it comes to actually filling in the tracker, rather than writing it down on the page, you instead do it on little pieces of vellum. You could do little dots to say whether something has happened, maybe some line work to say whether it's happened. But the reason we do these on vellum is because then we can lay them over the top of each other and see how one habit relates to another. You can start to see if there's any patterns between one thing happening versus another. And this doesn't just have to be used for habits or routines you're trying to build. This could also be a way to track your symptoms, or maybe how your habits relate to your symptoms, or possibly potentially allergy tracking as well. So recording the days that you ate common allergens and the response in the body. While I've made these little vellum cards kind of tight cut around the little boxes, you could also include a little extra space to write on them what you were tracking, or just include a key on the side that shows what each of the different symbols or colours mean. There are a lot of potential applications for that one, and you also don't have to keep the vellum pieces free from your journal. You could stick them in as a tip-in so that they lay one over the top of another. But the next idea we have are horizontal trackers. Typically speaking, with the majority of trackers we see, they are vertically aligned, but depending on the page space you have or the real estate you have in your layouts, a horizontal tracker can work really well too. In this one, rather than having Monday through Sunday or the days of the week going along the top, we instead put those ones down the side. Running along the top, you could have the different things you're trying to keep track of, or if you're setting up a tracker for just one thing like I have here, then maybe each of those numbers represents the week. So this could be a quarterly tracker for just one thing you're trying to keep track of. It's always a good idea to have something that indicates how you filled in your tracker. So we have this little key that says a check mark is done and a dot means not done. So for any of the days, in any of the weeks, you can just check off whether the thing has happened. I find a lot of the time something that helps me keep journaling novel for myself or keep myself interested in it is just making little changes like this. So changing the orientation of something, changing the frequency with which I'm using it. So going from a weekly tracker to a monthly to a yearly or something similar. The next idea comes from Melissa of Lissa1925, and that is the idea of side quests, where side stands for something I'll do eventually. This is another version of the someday maybe list or the future me problems, but with a more kind of like fantasy RPG theming. Rather than just writing yourself a full swamp of ideas of things you're going to get to eventually, what can be very helpful though is setting up some different categories in your list so that you can jot them down in the relevant spots. Some ideas are consume for like media, books, movies, TV shows you want to check out, get for things that you want to buy or acquire, and do for tasks or actions you want to take. But you can of course just leave it as a long running list if you want to, maybe employ the Alistair method if you want to have a little bit more organization with columns that represent the different types of entries to your list. Regardless of what name you use though, having a spot for those I'll get to it at some point tasks can be really useful. It means our brain stops ruminating on them because we've written them down and they have a safe space to live. The next idea we have though is a yearly first and last. This is where you record your first and last for something in the year, or multiple somethings if you want to. This can act as a really nice kind of snapshot of what life was like at those kind of key moments of the year, the very start of the year and the very end. And in this case, I've done it for books. So maybe the first read for the year and the last read for the year. Other things that you could do for this is a meal that you had, a social event, a memory, a happening. It could be the first and last project that you finished, or anything else, and can sometimes be used as a way to see how something has changed across the year. Another idea like that though is one where you don't just consider the first and last, but maybe take multiple snapshots throughout the year. I've set this one up so that it is monthly based, where you consider a couple of things that you actually have an interest in, because otherwise you won't record them, and in particular things that might change throughout the year. For instance, it could be a recent accomplishment, it could be your savings total, and it could be something you're currently loving, but there are a lot of different ideas for how you could use this one. Essentially though, you just set up your layout with each of your different spaces for the months, and then you have a space to enter whatever thing it is you're recording. So what is it that you're loving? What is your savings total? What is a recent accomplishment? While you can of course expand this and do like a half page or full page layout for each of these, sometimes just having these really quick and easy to fill in ones at the start of your journal can make the memory keeping aspect of it a lot more approachable. And that's what I quite like. The next idea we have though is a personal curriculum, and this is essentially outlining something or some things that you want to learn and making yourself a plan for how you're going to go about learning them. A lot of the time when we see these online, it just ends up being a list of things to read or things to check out, but I think that going in with a bit more of a plan can be really useful for getting the most out of it. I've set this one up to be loosely similar to an actual curriculum, so we have what topic we're learning, what the learning outcomes are or what you hope to be able to do by the end of this, what kind of assessment are you going to use to be able to measure your skills, and what learning materials do you have, and spaces to check off once you've gone and tapped that resource. Along with this, we can also set up an action plan for ourselves. So yes, we want to check out the learning materials and read things and such, but there's usually other stuff that we want to do as well to help us learn whatever it is we're trying to learn about. Having a spot set up in your journal to really break down that project of learning can be quite useful. The next idea we have though are your yearly ins and outs. So coming into your new year or your new season, your new planner, what is it that you want to be bringing with you, and what is it that you want to be leaving behind? These could be physical things, or they could be ideas, mindsets, approaches, habits, but ins are for anything you want to continue with, keep up with, start, whereas out is for anything you want to stop, eliminate, let go of, or just get rid of. A little ins and out space can essentially be like a declaration to yourself. This is the stuff I want more of, and this is the stuff that I don't want anymore. I've just tucked these ones into a corner, but you can of course write them in a simple list form if you wanted to. But flipping over, the next idea we have are seasonal bucket lists. This is one that I'm very much considering including for myself because I find that I don't feel like I'm making the most of each season, and especially if you have a particular soft point or some kind of like, nostalgia or attachment around one season in particular, that's another 3 seasons that you just sit there wishing for your favorite season to come around. I don't want to do that anymore, so what can we do to really celebrate the season, make the most of the opportunities that it brings, and just kind of like romanticize life in that season a little bit? The actual tasks that you're going to do as part of these very much depend on where you are, what's available in your area, what that season is like for you, and also just your personal preferences. But the ones we have here are some ideas. You can of course set it up so that it is one full page or maybe a full spread that has separate columns for each of the seasons, or maybe a separate section if it's all on one page. Or you could wait until you get to that season in your journal and set up a dedicated page for it there. Especially if you want to decorate the page with things from that season, maybe it could be more useful to wait until that season is a little bit closer. The next idea we have though is one of my favorites, and that is weekly based project planning. This is the actual kind of structure that I often use to plan my goals out, but in a structure like this, we'd write out what the goal or project is that we're working on, and then we have columns for each of the week numbers that we're going to be working on it across. Typically I do mine quarterly, so we have 1 through 13, and then running down the side here we have what the action steps are. As you schedule in time to work on those action steps, you just put a dot underneath the relevant week header. So if you're doing a task in week 1, that'd be a little dot under week 1. If you're doing a task in week 5, that would be putting it under week 5. The nice part about this type of structure is that you do not have to write your action steps out in chronological order. It means that when you're still in those kind of brainstorming stages and just trying to get ideas for the project out onto paper, you can just write them down in your action step swamp and then tie them to the week numbers to get more of an orderly looking system. While this is great for organizing an individual project, how do we actually decide what we're going to work on? Something like a project prioritization list can be really helpful here. And moving from left to right, the first column is just a spot to check off when the project is done, while the larger space next to it is to write out what the project is. Each of the columns on the end here though is something that you might consider as to whether you're going to undertake this project now or leave it for later. I've just done the columns so that they take up an individual doc grid box, but the points I have in here are cost, time, learning, interest, importance, urgency, and help. Going through those, if something is particularly costly, maybe you can't do it right now, you need to save up a little bit, so indicating either how much it costs or if it is particularly expensive, that can be something we consider. For time, this is considering how much time the project is going to take us. If it's going to be really time intensive and we don't have a lot of available time right now, maybe not the greatest idea to start it, whereas if it's going to be quick and maybe easy, we could get that started soon. For learning, this is whether we need to do any upskilling before we undertake the project. And for interest, this is just how eager we are to do it. Are we particularly curious about it? Are we excited about it? Does it actually spark joy thinking about doing this project? Whereas for importance and urgency, this is considering, does it need to be done like right now, this second? And if it didn't get done, how bad would it be? For importance, we're very much thinking about that kind of consequence of not doing the project, whereas for urgency, it's like, what's the kind of deadline around this? For instance, if it's coming up to winter and you haven't fixed that hole in your roof, that could feel kind of important and kind of urgent. There are some pretty big consequences for not doing that, and if the rains are coming, yeah, let's plug that hole. In terms of the help column though, this could be if you require assistance from somebody else, whether that be somebody you know, somebody that you're kind of paying to come and assist you with the project, or anybody else. By considering your projects against all of those criteria, it can help you pick which ones you're going to work on next. Underneath this though, the next idea we have are goal milestone rewards, or essentially when you get to different milestones in working on your goals, how are you going to reward the progress you're making? I am notoriously bad at not rewarding myself for making progress or not acknowledging my progress, and this is a way to combat that. When thinking about your goal, or multiple goals if you want to, you just need to write out what possible milestones are you going to hit along the way, ones that genuinely feel like an accomplishment, but they're not the fully finished goal like 100%ly checked off, and what rewards could you give yourself as related to those. You don't necessarily need to make the reward super related, but we do want it to scale appropriately. For instance, you probably won't be going out and buying yourself, I don't know, a new car after 2 days in a row of exercise. I mean, you might. This is your goal and you can pick your rewards as best you see fit. But for me, that doesn't seem quite so fitting. Plus, I love my car. Claire is a gem. As you check off your milestones though, you just need to also make sure to check off your rewards, and the reason there are 2 different check places is because, as said, I am notoriously bad for hitting the milestone and not giving myself the reward. We don't want to check off both as done when we've only actually achieved one of them. Flipping over though, another one related to goals is setting up a goal charm bracelet in your journal. For this one, you draw in the bracelet structure, and around the outside of these, write down the goals that you want to achieve. As you accomplish them, you can either do a little doodle related to the goal, or stick in a little sticker, and this essentially adds the charms to your charm bracelet. This is a really cute idea that I saw from Eleanor and Leaf over on Instagram, and for all of the inspiration sources that I've used in this video, those are tagged in the description box as well, along with all the materials I used. The next idea we have though are task cards, and you might be sitting here thinking, well, where is it? That's not a task card, that's just a list. And that's because the task card is a removable piece. This one has been set up so that you can attach it to the corner of your notebook. I've done it so that it attaches to the bottom corner, but honestly, if I was setting this one up for myself, I'd probably make it attach at the top, just because if you're carrying your journal around, it could possibly slip off the bottom. But the idea here is that rather than writing out a laundry list of tasks to do on any day, or week, or whatnot, for things that you do repeatedly, you just write them on this little task card, and then have an individual entry in your daily log or weekly log that encourages you to go and look at that thing. For instance, if you have a really well-established routine when it comes to doing your home admin on a Saturday morning, say, and you find that most of the steps you're doing pretty successfully, but there are some that you kind of forget or neglect, but you don't necessarily want to write this out every single Saturday. You just want to get on and do it. That's where having this little task card could be really useful. You can also make this task card a reusable structure by laminating it or sticking some kind of contact paper over the top. That way you can use a dry erase marker to mark off when you've done the things, and then just wipe it off and use it again the next time it needs to be used. Or you could of course just use pencil and erase the pencil when it's done. The nice part about setting these up though is that you can also use them as bookmarks in your journal, because if you don't trim the edge of the paper off, this actually sticks out the side ever so slightly, which can be used to find the page that you're working on. The next idea we have though is a 2-way rating system, and this one in particular would be really helpful if you want to rate pieces of media that you've been consuming, so like books, movies, TV shows and games, or also if you want to use a mood tracker but you find it kind of difficult to assign a mood for the day. In this 2-way rating system you have 2 different axes, so one scale along the top and one scale along the side, and then considering both of those things together you can assign a rating. I've done this as a 5-star rating, so if both of the aspects kind of suck, it's a 1 star. If only one of them sucks, it's a 2-star. And if one of them sucks but the other is really good, it's a 3-star. On the other hand, if both of the things are really good, then it's a 5-star. And if one of them is particularly good but the other one's kind of mid, then it's a 4-star. 2 middle of the pictures gives you 3-star though. The actual things that you have on the side, or the items that you're using to do your ratings though, that very much depends on your context. For instance, if I was going to use this for a book rating system, I'd have one of them be solely based on enjoyment, because honestly, the majority of the time, if I'm reading a book, a fiction book, it's for my personal enjoyment. So that one's pretty important. The other scale though could be essentially for everything else. Like, is the writing good? Was the plot well developed? Did I like the characters? Anything like that could go over the other side. As said though, you can also use this outside of the media realm. So maybe you want to have a mood tracker in your journal, but you don't necessarily love just assigning it based on happy, sad, enthusiastic. Maybe instead you want to have two different things that you're considering as part of that mood. It could be happiness versus energy, or energy versus productivity. Then, instead of assigning particular star ratings, you could just assign different colors that you use to fill in your mood tracker. I see this one having the best applications in my reading journal though, but our next idea is a frequency-based habit tracker. Rather than tracking your habits on a daily basis, where as soon as you miss a day it's like, oh cool, I broke the streak, everything is ruined, you can instead set up trackers where you don't necessarily write down what day you did or didn't do something, or have a spot for every single day, but more so just record your successes. Every time you do one of the things that you're keeping track of, you just color in a little box to say, yep, I got the thing done. That means you don't have any blank spots to kind of highlight the fact that you didn't get to something, which for a lot of people can be really demotivating. Also, if you have habits that you could do multiple times a day, you're better able to give yourself credit for the days that you do that. This could also be helpful for habits where you're not actually aiming to do them every single day. And we have another idea for that style of habit coming up in a bit. But on to the next spread. The next idea is to have an extended monthly log. Now, not only is an extended monthly log a really nice way to balance the page, because you end up with 4 columns here and 4 columns here, but it's also a good way to capture anything that you want to do across the week, but don't necessarily have a particular day you want to do it on. Here you can see we have MTW, like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, all through to Sunday, but then in this last column, we also have W for the week. So in week 1, week 2, week 3, 4, or 5, is there anything in particular you want to action or do, but you don't necessarily need to do it on a Thursday or need to do it on a Tuesday? This can be a really helpful spot to capture that information. What you can also do is use this as an extended note space. So rather than having it separated so that we have week 1, 2, 3, you just have this as a full column where you can write down any tasks and notes to do across the entire of the month. This can also act as a tracking space if you wanted to for any kind of weekly actions or habits that you're trying to build. But there are a lot of potential applications, and it can also be a nice way to utilize this extra space without just sticker bombing it or filling it with doodles, which is also valid. And if you like using your journal that way, it's all good, because these are all just ideas. Stepping back into the realm of habits though, the first idea we have here is a flip out monthly tracker, but the actual structure for it is on the back of this one. If we scoot the journal to the side and flip this out, having your monthly or possibly even annual trackers on a flip out can be a really helpful way to be able to see them at any point in your journal. Yes, we can view them on the page they're attached, but we can also flip forward and view them from the current page we're on. This can be especially helpful for anybody who finds that they love the idea of a tracker, whether that be monthly or annual, but they're not very good at actually flipping back and filling it in. If you can see it from whatever page you're working on, it can be a little easier to remember to check back in with it. If you're doing it as a monthly tracker, I would probably attach it to my monthly log space, whereas if you're doing it as an annual tracker, I might even attach that at the very front of the journal, like on the inside card, just so I know exactly where to find it. The grid trackers that we have here are a printable, available in my little shop, and I've also used those for our next idea, which is the idea of extra habits. Now, before we mentioned that sometimes you're keeping track of a habit that the aim isn't necessarily to do it every single day. And for those, it can be helpful to, in your habit tracking space, kind of acknowledge the fact that you're not aiming for perfection here, or not aiming for every single day on the calendar to be checked off. This might be by specifically calling out that you want to have your daily do's, or the ones that you do every day, versus the ones that maybe you do it every second day or 3 times a week, or whatever frequency is going to be ideal for you in working on that thing. By having that specifically called out though, it means that whenever you come back to look at this layout, you don't get disheartened looking at something that doesn't feel complete. Maybe it is complete based on the frequency you were actually aiming for. And it can be good to have something that specifically calls that out, because if you've been journaling for a while, looking back on some of your old journals, we have a tendency to forget those kind of things. Kind of similar to all of those habit trackers where I didn't include a key and now I have no idea what I was keeping track of. Flipping out our tip in though, the next idea we have is a bright moments log. This is very much one of those ideas that is here to combat our negativity bias. At the end of the day, if you find that you're all too readily able to remember the stuff that kind of sucked, or the stuff that didn't go your way, or the stuff that just didn't feel great, having a bright moments log can be a really nice way to look for the positive. It's kind of similar to a gratitude log, but we're not so much paying gratitude towards these things, but just acknowledging the fact that they were a bright moment in the day. These can be really small things, like I saw a nice flower, or I saw a cute dog. It could be a favor that you did for future you, like I laid out my clothes for tomorrow so morning me doesn't need to think about it. Sometimes your bright moments are going to be bigger though, so getting to hang out with friends or memory making or events. But being intentional in trying to think about that one brightest moment in the day, what your highlight was, what was the thing that sparked the most joy, can just help combat our negativity bias in the long run. Next to this one though, this idea is really just for fun, and this is a journal weight tracker. Now, rather than tracking your personal weight, if you're the kind of person who maybe uses a lot of stickers or doesn't and just is really curious about it, keeping track of how the weight of your journal changes across the year could be just an interesting little addition. In theory, if you're the type of person who doesn't remove things from your journal as the year progresses, over time the weight will increase, and it might be interesting to see which months in particular it went up the most. This could be because you're adding pieces of ephemera or stickers and tapes and decorative items, or it could just be how it changes with the use of your pen. Of course, in order to use one like this, you do need to have access to a scale, but here I've just set it up so that then the mass could be recorded, and then maybe there's a little graph on the side that shows how it changed over the year. Of course, if you're using multiple journals in a year, then it might jump a little erratically in the middle of the year somewhere, but as said, that one is just for fun. Another idea that is a bit of fun is monthly memory keeping, but done in a way that is super simple, very easy. To do this one across the month, you just collect up any little pieces of ephemera, any photos that you took, ones that are for moments that you want to remember, and then once a month, towards the end of the month, you just cut them up and stick them into your journal along with some pieces of lettering to either explain them or fill in the spaces. I love to use memory keeping style layouts to practice my lettering, so using different fonts and maybe different borders and boxes and such, but the aim for this kind of layout is that it doesn't need to be perfect, it doesn't need to be Pinterest or Instagram worthy, it just needs to be captured. To keep this page in the same theme as the rest of the ones we've had, I have used some more of that PET tape, but you could also take that out to make some more space for photos or ephemera, or if you don't want to be creative like this, you can just turn it into a bulleted list. That is also equally fine. It can just be nice to have a dedicated spot for all of those memories and be a little bit fun. Another idea that is mainly for fun is at the back of the notebook, and that one is a washi graveyard. This is a fun way to use up extra pieces of tape or stickers that you don't really have anywhere to put them in the layout you're setting up, but you don't just want to waste them. While the one we have here is just an example, this is actually something I like to do in my journal, so taking any extra pieces of tape or stickers or whatnot and just sticking them all over the back cover. Sometimes I'll also write down some little notes, whereas other times I'll just rip up pieces to fill in space. You can aim to make a kind of collage with these if you want to, but often I'm just aiming for space filling, and it's a nice simple but creative way to use up those extra pieces that adds a little bit more fun to your journal. While this was just 26 ideas for what you could include in your new setup, we also have a sister video to this one with 70 more ideas. Of course, they are all just ideas, you don't have to include everything, but if you're looking for inspiration, that one is the next one to check out. We have ideas in the categories of reference layouts, routines, memories, trackers, schedules, and more, so click or tap on that one and I'll see you over there.